Okay, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm very pleased to have with me as my guest Chris Bowley, who's a partner at Fish Richardson. Chris, welcome to the program.
Richard, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Chris, you have one of the more unusual backgrounds, at least for lawyers, and I see you have a master's and PhD in physics. Tell me a little bit about how you chose physics as a major or field of study in the first place.
Oh, well, I always had an interest and proclivity for sciences. I've always been interested in, how the world works, and thought I would study oceanography when I left for university after high school. Um, and my first year physics class at the University of Cape Town really sort of took my imagination.
Hmm.
And physics seemed to be the one area of science that probed the most sort of fundamental of questions. What are we made of? Questions about the universe, both, the nature of things at the largest and the smallest scales. And, I was always interested in how things worked, and this just seemed a logical extension
Hmm.
of sort of answering those questions. And so I kind of followed my nose as an undergrad, took more and more physics classes, eventually majored in physics, and then did a what's called an honors degree in South Africa, where I studied and grew up. We have a 3-year undergrad, and then if you do a fourth year of study, it's sort of called an honors degree, and that's where you focus exclusively on your major, as it were.
Hmm.
So, I ended up majoring in physics and doing honors and then wanting to study further. And
Wow.
at that time, the 90s, if you wanted to study science, if you wanted to study big science, you came to the United States.
Hmm.
And um, I also learned that if you know, if you applied to a graduate program in the US and you were accepted, they would effectively pay your way by
Hmm.
giving you teaching assistantships and then research assistantships. So that's the course that I embarked on. Um, I applied to a number of schools in the States and was accepted by Brown University and enrolled there, and the rest is on my resume. So
What was your PhD thesis on? What area of physics did you try to focus on?
so I ended up doing fairly applied physics. I studied soft condensed matter,
Okay.
specifically optical materials, and more specifically, I studied the formation of liquid crystal and polymer composites
Huh.
that if you cured these mixtures in certain ways, you could actually make very interesting optical materials out of them.
Huh.
And
Okay.
um, my thesis advisor, the professor whose lab I worked in, had joined the faculty after doing a stint at Xerox PARC, where he was obviously engaged in highly applied research,
Hmm.
making LCD screens, and he had sort of started a lab looking at liquid crystals and optical materials, and so I found this fascinating,
Hmm.
and you know, um, started to work for him, and that's what I ended up studying.
Seems
So.
like a pretty obscure area. How did you happen to kind of fall into that? Was it through a class, or was just where the research funding was and the availability for PhD programs?
It was sort of more the latter actually. I'd actually started to work in a lab studying studying more fundamental physics, actually superconductivity,
Right.
high temperature superconductivity, and I realized that anytime you worked with a cryogenic system, with a fridge that takes materials to very low temperatures, you spend an enormous amount of time futzing with the fridge instead of actually getting data
Yeah.
and studying the science. And I realized that wasn't really a fit for me, and so spoke to other professors at the school and spoke with other students, and you know, met this gentleman. His name's Greg Crawford. And on a personal level, really got on with him very well. And what he was doing looked fascinating to me. I think I always knew at that stage that my future was probably going to be in industry and not in
Mhm.
academia. So
Mhm.
wanted to study something applied, and he had availability in his lab, and so I signed up.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I was just going to ask you what your career goal was at the time you were a grad student. But so did you ever go into industry or you never even did?
No, no, no. I was in industry long enough to know that I didn't want to be a scientist in industry. My first job out of grad school was at 3M, the
Okay.
big materials company located in St. Paul, Minnesota. I was recruited by them out of grad school into their
Uh-huh.
optical systems division.
Uh-huh.
Um, it's a pretty diverse company. They do a lot of great things, and one of the businesses that was really growing at the time was selling prismatic films for LCD screens.
Mm.
And they were one of the few companies in the industry actually making money. They were making money because they had a very strong patent position, and every single LCD screen in the world needed two sheets of their film in order to be competitive.
Mm.
And so they had this great business, and they were looking to expand and
Mm.
develop other films, and other products for displays. And so it seemed like it was a pretty good fit.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I got there and started working with with other scientists, and also closely with patent lawyers, in-house patent lawyers at
Oh, I can
3M.
I can feel like
So,
where maybe
yeah,
you're
this
out
is
of
where
my
the
you're
this
you're
is where
giving away
the
the
where
next
the
question.
transition is happening. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
exactly.
Um, yeah, so I worked at 3M for about 18 months.
Okay, interesting. So you was it more the lack of interest or interest in the industry job that drove it, or was it more the attraction of the patent lawyers that you work with that attracted you to law? I guess was it more of a push or more of a pull?
Um, there was actually both, I think. The on the push side, I I sort of got a taste of how um product development in a large industrial company
Yeah,
works.
right.
And there were a few things that my eyes were open to, the the technologies that get developed with the management darlings, not the you know not things of sort of inherent interest to the technical staff.
Yeah,
Um, Things moved slowly.
yeah.
Running an experiment um, on a pilot line at a place like that, was $1 million investment, and took months to set up. And then, you would go and you would make miles of film, and then you would spend the next 6 months looking at it, and and then figure out what the next experiment would be. And it was, so it sort of moved frustratingly slowly.
Hmm.
Um, I saw colleagues, 15-year veterans of 3M, chemistry PhDs. Management would decide that the program that they were a part of, you know, no longer had sort of the same commercial value, and they would lose their jobs.
Wow.
So, there was definitely um, sort of a sober reckoning with what it meant to do research in industry. But then on the flip side, I started to work closely, as I said, with the in-house attorneys at 3M. And what sort of struck me was, the 3M has this large campus in St. Paul with, and the business units are sort of scattered around this large 14-story building in the center of the campus. where the executive team sits. So not surprisingly, the C-suite is on the 14th floor. The lawyers were on the 13th floor. And so it became apparent really quickly just
Important
how
they
sort of
were.
important they were.
Yeah, yeah,
They had management's ear, but they also, particularly the patent lawyers, had were in with the technical people too. They had to understand the science, they had to understand the technology. It really sort of married two things that were um got me out of bed in the morning, right?
yeah, yeah.
Understanding and being on the vanguard of science and technology and being exposed to new technology. Um, and but also the business strategy, right? This sort of understanding how rights in the technology sort of impacted business strategy. And it just seemed to be a really interesting draw for me.
Yeah, interesting. Well, did you decide to go to law school right away, or did you try maybe working as a patent agent first, or what steps did you take once you
Well,
decided this is something you wanted to do?
so one other thing that sort of happened around this time was it was a friend of mine from grad school had got a position at a law firm in Boston,
Mm.
coming straight out of grad school with her PhD as a technology specialist.
Hmm.
And I didn't really know that these positions existed. And so the idea that you would, go and work as a patent agent during the day, go to law school part-time, and have that tuition covered, um, sounded like a pretty good deal to me.
Mm.
And so at that stage, I applied for technology specialist positions, and um, was recruited and accepted a position at Fish, and
Mm.
that was in 2001, and I've been there ever since. So
Amazing. Oh, so you started working as a technical specialist and then later on
yes,
as an attorney, and oh wow, so your entire career literally has been at Fish.
yeah, that's right.
That's
Since
pretty
before I
amazing.
was a lawyer, correct.
Wow,
Yeah.
amazing. So do you feel like you get to use your science now in your practice? Tell me a little about how you get to use it. Do you use it a lot? How do you use it?
I use it all the time. I think that clients come to me um, in large part because of the technical background that I have.
Yeah,
They have they're developing technology that is complex, that has, there's a lexicon that goes with it, and a lot of them have had experiences with other attorneys where the their engineers and their scientists spend a tremendous amount of time teaching the science to the lawyers so that the lawyers can then, patent their inventions.
right.
And you want your engineers and scientists doing engineering and science and not, uh, you know, teaching lawyers basics of technology. And so, um, a lot of clients that I work with have come to me because of my technical background and my ability to sort of understand and pick up their technology. So I think I use it all the time.
Yeah, interesting.
And it's sort of really delivered on that front as a career for me.
What is the most complicated technology you've had to grapple with as a lawyer?
Oh, well, let's see. I've got to be careful now because make sure that I can disclose it.
Well, just the general area. It doesn't have to be anything. Don't have to be
Yeah, sure. I mean there are um uh I would say some novel superconducting materials and a theory that sort of supports them. Um that that for me was sort of fascinating and incredibly complex, and I found myself going back to a lot of my grad school textbooks to try to get my arms around that. I think I've there's been things on plasma fusion
Hmm.
that I've dealt with that have been challenging, and you know s- um probably some photonics technology as well. There's some really interesting things going on in that realm, and you know, those keep me on my toes. So
Yeah. So you happy with your career choice? You're glad you made the switch from science to law?
I couldn't imagine doing anything else. Yeah,
Wow. Well, that's
it's really been a fantastic career for me. It's very, very fulfilling. I can't. I feel blessed that I landed where I did because I went into it somewhat informed, but never. You don't know what you're going to in a law firm. You don't know
yeah.
what the practice of law is going to be like. But I feel very fulfilled.
Do you if you could go back and do it all over again, would you have just skipped the PhD? Because obviously you don't probably need that to become a lawyer, or are you glad you still did the PhD?
Um, I, I, I am, well, for many reasons, there's no ways I would skip the PhD.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
so the PhD is what allowed me to move to the United States.
I see. I see. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but setting that aside, I think that, like I alluded to earlier, the nature of the work that I get comes to me because of my PhD.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I I also found that, grad school um, gave me lessons in more than just the subject matter.
Mm,
I actually there was sort of an inflection point that I experienced in grad school where it's almost like sort of the fog lifts on a field, and suddenly you sort of you have a much broader landscape and understand how science works at a larger scale. And I would never have had that experience just with an undergrad or even a master's degree. And so I feel like I needed that time sort of immersed in a field and wrestling with a field of study in order to kind of have that breakthrough.
yeah.
So yeah, I have no regrets. I wouldn't change a thing in terms of the academic path that I took.
Yeah. Well, Chris, this has been a fascinating conversation. It was such an interesting story. And congratulations on all your success, and thanks for taking the time to share it with me.
Thank you so much for having me, Richard. It's been my pleasure.
This is Richard Hsu and Chris Bowley. Thanks.